One quiet morning, as sunlight pierced through the heavy mist over the Everglades, a father took his young daughter on a simple fishing trip, just as they had done many times before. It should have been nothing more than a peaceful outing, where the gentle sound of water and the chirping of birds blended into nature's song. But this time, they never came back. No call for help, no clear trace left behind, only their car sitting silently near the dock with their familiar belongings still inside. And then, years later, a hunter stumbled upon something seemingly insignificant, an old, mud-covered camera. Yet when the photographs hidden inside were finally revealed, the truth turned out to be far more disturbing than anyone could have imagined. A little girl's innocent smile, her father's patient gaze, and then, the final images, shaky and blurred, as if someone had tried desperately to capture their last moments. The story of this father and daughter is not just another disappearance. It is a haunting mystery that has never been solved. So, what really happened on that fishing trip that was supposed to be so ordinary? The Everglades is a place that seems both alive and timeless, stretching endlessly with its tangled mangroves, quiet marshes, and waterways that reflect the morning sun like shards of broken glass. To outsiders, it can feel like a wild paradise, a sanctuary for birds and alligators. But to those who live nearby, it is also a land that demands respect. Its beauty is undeniable, yet its silence often carries an unsettling weight, as if nature itself holds secrets no one should disturb. For Mark Whitaker, however, this landscape was familiar, almost comforting. At 42 years old, Mark had built his life around simple values: hard work, family, and the quiet satisfaction of time spent outdoors. He was the kind of man neighbors described as dependable, the one who would lend a hand without being asked, who fixed his own tools rather than buying new ones, and who found peace in the steady rhythm of fishing. Mark was not wealthy, but he had everything that truly mattered: a loving family, a modest home, and a daughter who adored him. That daughter was Lily, just 10 years old at the time of their disappearance. She was a bright, curious child, full of questions about the world and an energy that seemed to light up every room she entered. To her, fishing trips with her father weren't just about catching fish. They were adventures, precious moments where she could learn, laugh, and share secrets only she and her dad would understand. She loved the smell of the water, the way the dragonflies hovered in the sunlight, and most of all, the way her father's calm voice explained everything, from how to tie a knot to why the heron stood so still at the water's edge. Emily, Mark's wife, and Lily's mother often watched them prepare for their outings with a mixture of warmth and worry. She knew how much those mornings meant to her daughter, and she trusted Mark completely. Yet there was always a small flicker of unease whenever they drove off with their gear. The Everglades could be unpredictable. Still, she let them go, believing that these memories would someday be the stories Lily would tell her own children. On that fateful morning, Mark was his usual meticulous self. He checked the tackle box twice, making sure the lures and lines were organized. He loaded the small aluminum boat onto the trailer with practiced ease. He even packed Lily's favorite snacks, teasing her about how she always ate more than she caught. Lily, excited and restless, skipped around the driveway, clutching her small fishing rod with the pink handle, eager to head out. The scene was ordinary, tender, and unremarkable, until the ordinary suddenly unraveled. The Everglades had always been a place where father and daughter found connection, laughter, and peace. But as the mist that morning lifted slowly off the water, it would soon become the backdrop to a mystery that no search team, no investigation, and no amount of time could ever fully explain. The morning of their disappearance began like so many others before it, quiet, serene, and filled with anticipation. Mark and Lily set out early, leaving their small neighborhood just as the first light touched the horizon. Emily stood at the doorway, waving to them as the rumble of the Honda SUV faded into the distance. She remembered the way Lily leaned out the passenger window, her ponytail bouncing in the wind, calling back, "Bye, Mom, we'll bring dinner." It was a scene so ordinary, so comforting, that Emily never imagined it would be the last time she saw them. By mid-morning, Mark's SUV was spotted near the entrance to the Everglades, He drove down a narrow dirt road that led to a small boat ramp, one he had used many times before. Locals later recalled seeing a man and a little girl unloading gear from their vehicle. They noticed nothing unusual, just a father carefully securing a boat to the water while his daughter danced impatiently nearby, eager to cast her line. Around noon, the weather shifted slightly. A haze settled over the wetlands, soft but noticeable, the kind that made the landscape feel otherworldly. Still, nothing seemed dangerous. The Everglades often carried such moods, and seasoned visitors knew how quickly the air could change from bright to heavy, from inviting to foreboding. Mark, confident in his familiarity with the area, likely paid little attention. When Emily expected them back by late afternoon, she wasn't immediately alarmed. Mark sometimes lingered longer than planned, especially if Lily begged for just one more cast. But as dusk approached and shadows stretched across the yard, unease began to creep in. She tried, calling Mark's cell phone, only to be met with silence. At first, she assumed there was no signal out on the water. By nightfall, her hands trembled as she dialed again and again, her calls still going unanswered. The next morning, panic fully took hold. Friends and neighbors joined Emily, driving toward the Everglades in search of any sign of the pair. When they arrived at the boat ramp, Mark's SUV was still parked exactly where he had left it. The boat trailer was empty. Inside the vehicle sat Lily's backpack, a few unopened snacks, and a pair of sandals. To Emily, the sight was unbearable, her daughter's belongings waiting for an owner who had not returned. Authorities were quickly notified. Search and rescue teams fanned out across the swampy terrain, deploying boats and helicopters. Dogs were brought in to track scents along the water's edge. For days, they scoured the labyrinth of waterways, their voices calling into the dense, humid air. But there was nothing. No overturned boat, no discarded fishing rod, not even a scrap of clothing caught on a branch. It was as if the Everglades had swallowed them whole. Reporters descended on the scene, their headlines filled with words like mystery and vanished. Speculation ran wild. Some suggested a tragic accident, that the boat had capsized, dragging both father and daughter beneath the current. Others whispered about alligators, hidden dangers, or even foul play. But without evidence, every theory remained just that, speculation. As days turned into weeks, hope began to dim. Emily refused to give up, but the absence of answers was its own torment. Each night, she replayed her last memory of Lily's smiling face, searching for something, anything that might explain why her family had been torn from her so suddenly. That day, which began with laughter and routine, ended with a silence so heavy it would echo for years. It was the day a father and daughter disappeared into the heart of the Everglades, leaving behind only questions that no one could answer. In the days that followed, the Everglades became the stage for one of the most exhaustive searches the county had ever seen. Law enforcement, park rangers, volunteer rescuers, and even strangers who had read about the disappearance in the newspaper poured into the wetlands, with one goal: to bring Mark and Lily home. Helicopters circled above the marshes, their blades slicing through the thick, humid air as spotters scanned the water below for the shimmer of metal or the ripple of movement. Boats prowled the channels slowly, their engines humming as searchers leaned over the sides, peering into the dark, murky depths. Divers entered the water despite the risks, alligators lurking unseen, water moccasins weaving through reeds, and visibility often no more than an arm's length. It was dangerous. But the urgency to find a father and his little girl pushed fear aside. On land, teams with dogs combed through the sawgrass and mudflats, their calls echoing across the emptiness. Mark, Lily. The voices carried, but only silence returned. Each hour that passed without discovery weighed heavier on the searchers. For the volunteers, many of them parents themselves, it was impossible not to imagine their own children in Lily's place. Emily stood at the edge of the ramp most days, refusing to leave. She watched the search unfold, with eyes hollowed by sleepless nights, clutching Lily's pink fishing rod in her hands like a lifeline. Reporters often swarmed her, asking for statements, but her words were always the same. Please, just find them. Please, bring them back. For weeks, the search expanded outward. The Coast Guard was called to sweep wider sections of water. Drones were deployed in hopes of spotting the boat from above. Local fishermen offered their knowledge of hidden inlets and tricky currents, guiding teams through paths outsiders might miss. Still, nothing surfaced. No overturned boat, no life vests, no trace at all. Speculation began to stir among the public. Could Mark have staged their disappearance? Had they wandered into the deeper swamp and been lost forever? Others whispered darker possibilities: an attack, foul play by someone who knew them, but investigators found no evidence to support any theory. The more they searched, the more the Everglades seemed determined to hold on to its secret. Months passed. The official search scaled down, but Emily and a handful of volunteers refused to give up. They raised funds for private divers, organized small groups to walk the banks, and posted missing flyers in every nearby town. Each effort ended the same way, with nothing but aching hearts and unanswered questions. The Everglades is vast and unforgiving. Its waters shift with the seasons, swallowing evidence and hiding it beneath layers of silt and vegetation. Many who had lived their whole lives near its borders warned that the swamp does not give back what it takes. And yet, for Emily, hope never completely died. She returned to the ramp often, staring at the water as if willing it to surrender her family. By the first anniversary of the disappearance, the case was officially deemed cold. The files sat in the sheriff's office, thick with reports, maps, and photographs, but thin on answers. For the community, it was a tragedy that faded into silence, another story swallowed by the wilderness. But for Emily, it was a wound that never closed. She often said that the hardest part was not grief, it was the absence of truth. Without bodies, without evidence, there was no closure. Just the haunting thought that somewhere, out in the endless swamps, lay the final chapter of Mark and Lily's story, waiting to be uncovered. Nearly a decade passed before the silence of the Everglades was broken. For most, the disappearance of Mark and Lily had become another unsolved tragedy, a mystery whispered about in local diners and remembered only on anniversaries. But for Emily, the ache never dulled. She kept their pictures framed by the front door, their fishing rods resting untouched in the garage, as if at any moment they might walk back in. Then, one autumn afternoon, everything changed. A hunter named James Carver, a man who had roamed the Everglades since childhood, ventured deeper into the swamps than usual. He was tracking deer when his boot struck something half buried in the mud near a cluster of mangroves. At first, he thought it was just another piece of litter plastic or rusted metal abandoned by careless travelers. But when he bent down, he realized it was a camera. The device was weathered and caked in grime, its strap frayed and its buttons stiff with age. Somehow, despite the years, it had remained intact. Curiosity gnawed at James. He slipped it into his pack, thinking it would make an odd keepsake, and carried it home. That night, under the dim glow of his workbench lamp, he carefully pried open the corroded compartment. To his surprise, the memory card inside was still there. James didn't expect much. Water and time usually erased all traces. But when he inserted the card into his computer, his breath caught. Against all odds, the files had survived. Dozens of images filled the screen, faded, grainy, but visible. He scrolled slowly, his unease growing with every picture. The first photos were innocent enough. Mark standing proudly with Lily at the boat ramp. The girl flashing a toothy grin while holding her pink fishing rod. Another showed the boat drifting lazily on calm waters, sunlight shimmering across the surface. There were pictures of Lily giggling at a fish wriggling in her hands, her father leaning over to help her remove the hook. Ordinary, joyful moments of a father and daughter spending the day together. But then, the tone shifted. In one image, barely noticeable in the background, a dark shape lingered near the tree line. At first glance, it might have been a shadow, or perhaps a trick of the light. Yet in the next photo, the same shape appeared closer, less like a blur, more like a figure. Lily's expression seemed unchanged, but Mark's face was different. He was no longer smiling. He looked past the lens, his eyes narrowed, focused on something behind the camera. James scrolled faster now, his pulse quickening. More photos followed. Hurried, tilted shots of the water, the reeds, and then what looked like an unfamiliar man standing on the shore. The final images were the most chilling. The camera seemed to have been clutched in trembling hands, the frames blurry, chaotic. A streak of movement, a flash of Lily's frightened eyes, and then nothing. James sat frozen. He didn't sleep that night. By morning, he knew he couldn't keep what he'd found to himself. He drove straight to the sheriff's office and handed over the camera and memory card, recounting exactly where he discovered them. When investigators examined the images, they were stunned. After years of dead ends, this was the first real evidence to surface. It reopened the case, igniting both hope and dread. Who was the figure in the background? Why had Mark looked so alarmed? And what happened in those final chaotic moments? For Emily, the discovery was both a gift and a torment. At last, she had proof that her husband and daughter had lived beyond that morning, that something had interrupted their day. But the photographs also brought unbearable new questions, ones that suggested a darker fate than she had ever imagined. The swamp had finally given up a piece of its secret. When the photographs from the old camera were released to investigators, they spread quickly, first among law enforcement, then to specialists, and eventually into the hands of journalists who pressed for answers. Each image carried a weight far heavier than its faded colors and grainy pixels suggested. Together, they told a story that was both intimate and terrifying, a visual record of two lives that ended in mystery. The early pictures seemed almost painfully ordinary. Mark stood at the boat ramp, one hand on the aluminum boat, the other resting on Lily's shoulder. His expression was calm, protective, the look of a father who felt at home in the wilderness. Lily, in her bright yellow life vest, grinned so widely her eyes nearly disappeared. To those who saw the photos later, the innocence of that moment felt cruel, in hindsight an image of joy, unknowingly shadowed by tragedy. Other shots captured details of the day. The tackle box open on the bench seat, a small cooler filled with sandwiches, the shimmer of sunlight on the water as the boat glided into the marsh. Lily snapped playful selfies, her hair messy from the breeze, her laughter almost visible in the frame. These pictures were what any family might have taken, tokens of a day spent together, carefree and safe. But as the series of images unfolded, unease grew. One photograph showed Mark turning slightly in his seat, his eyes not on Lily or the camera but fixed somewhere in the distance. His mouth was set in a hard line. In the background, blurred but distinct, a figure stood near the tree line. Some dismissed it as a trick of shadow, the outline of a tree against the light. Yet in the very next picture, the figure seemed closer, clearer, unmistakably human. Investigators enlarged the image. The silhouette was tall, dressed in dark clothing, and though the face was obscured, the posture was unsettling, rigid, watchful, as if the figure were studying them. Mark's body language in subsequent shots changed. He no longer appeared relaxed. His shoulders tightened, and his hand, once gently guiding Lily's fishing rod, gripped the boat's edge instead. The sequence that followed was disturbing. The photos grew less steady, as though taken in haste. One captured Lily looking over her shoulder, her smile replaced by confusion. Another showed the waterline tilting sharply, suggesting the camera was snatched up quickly. The reeds blurred as if the boat had begun moving faster. Then came a chilling frame, a man unfamiliar, looming on the shore, closer than before. His face was turned slightly, caught between shadows, but the intent behind his presence seemed undeniable. The last three photographs were the most haunting of all. The first was a jumbled blur of water and sky, as though the camera had been shaken violently. The second, clearer but heartbreaking, showed Lily pressed against her father's side, her wide eyes staring directly into the lens. Fear radiated from her expression, a child's instinctive awareness that something was terribly wrong. The final image was almost incomprehensible. Dark streaks slashed across the frame, as though the camera had been knocked or dropped. In the corner, a fragment of a face could be seen, unfamiliar, harsh, distorted by movement. Then, nothing more. For the investigators, the photographs were a nightmare frozen in time. They confirmed that Mark and Lily's disappearance had not been a simple accident. Someone had been there. Someone had watched them. And in those last frantic moments, that someone had stepped into their world. Experts debated endlessly over the images. Some argued the figure was a hunter who had stumbled into the background, unrelated to their fate. Others believed the photos captured the presence of a stalker, perhaps someone who had followed them deliberately. The blurriness and gaps left much to interpretation, but one fact remained undeniable. The expressions on Mark and Lily's faces told of fear, not chance. When Emily was shown the photographs, she broke down. She recognized the subtle shift in Mark's expression, the way he looked when he sensed danger but didn't want to alarm his daughter. She saw the fear in Lily's final gaze, a look no parent should ever have to imagine. To her, the pictures were not just evidence, they were the last memories of her family, frozen forever. For the public, the release of the images turned the disappearance into a haunting legend. People debated what the photographs meant, what they revealed, and what they concealed. But for those closest to Mark and Lily, the pictures were a cruel reminder. The Everglades had not taken them silently. Someone, or something, had been there with them. And whatever happened next had been erased, leaving only those haunting snapshots as fragments of a story too terrifying to finish. The photographs had shaken both investigators and the community, but they were only the beginning. Once the images surfaced, the sheriff's department reopened the case, combing through old evidence with renewed urgency. This time, they had something tangible, something that hinted at foul play. And with that new lens, every unexplained detail from years earlier began to take on a darker meaning. Forensic specialists were called in to analyze the photographs. Using enhancement software, they magnified the blurred figure in the tree line and compared it against local records of hunters and known offenders. Though the images lacked enough clarity for a definitive identification, one unsettling truth emerged. The figure was not random. His presence was consistent across multiple frames, his proximity shrinking each time, suggesting deliberate movement toward Mark and Lily. He wasn't passing through. He was following them. Investigators also revisited the scene where the camera had been discovered. With careful mapping, they realized the location was several miles from the last known area where Mark had launched his boat. How had the camera traveled that far? Search teams dredged the nearby waters and combed the mangroves once more. In one shallow inlet, they uncovered rusted fragments of aluminum, the remains of a small boat, corroded nearly beyond recognition. Testing confirmed it was Mark's vessel. The discovery ruled out one theory. This was no simple accident. Something had stopped them, violently enough to destroy the boat. The most chilling revelation came when digital forensics experts restored metadata from the photos. The timestamps revealed the sequence of events down to the minute. The playful images of Lily had been taken late in the morning. The first appearance of the mysterious figure came just after noon, and the final blurred, chaotic photos were stamped at 12:47 p.m. After that, nothing. The timeline suggested that whatever happened had unfolded quickly. Within less than an hour, investigators began piecing together theories. One possibility was that Mark and Lily had encountered an armed stranger deep in the Everglades, someone who might have threatened them. Mark's protective posture in the photos suggested he had noticed the danger before Lily fully realized it. Perhaps he tried to steer the boat away, explaining the tilted shots and frantic images. But if so, who was the stranger? A breakthrough came when locals recalled rumors from that summer whispers of a drifter seen roaming the swamps, a man who lived off the grid and avoided authorities. He was described as tall, gaunt, and often dressed in dark clothing. Some remembered seeing him near campsites, watching silently from a distance before vanishing back into the trees. At the time, no one connected those sightings to the disappearance. But now, with the photographs. The resemblance was too close to ignore. Law enforcement tracked down old reports of trespassing and suspicious behavior in the area. A few mentioned confrontations with fishermen, arguments over trespassing on his land. The descriptions matched the figure. But by the time investigators tried to locate him, he had disappeared as suddenly as he had appeared. For Emily, these revelations were devastating. For years, she had clung to the fragile hope that Mark and Lily's disappearance was an accident, that perhaps the water had claimed them quickly, sparing them fear. Now, the photographs and evidence told a different story. Her husband and daughter had been hunted. They had been aware of the danger, and in their last moments, they had been terrified. The horrifying truth was not just that they were gone, but that they had likely suffered at the hands of another human being. The swamp had not swallowed them naturally. It had hidden a crime. The Everglades, with its vast waters and endless cover, had become the perfect accomplice, erasing the traces of violence and sheltering the predator responsible. Though the identity of the figure was never conclusively proven, the implication was clear. Mark and Lily's deaths were not the work of chance, nor of nature, but of deliberate malice. And the most terrifying part? The man who appeared in those final photos might still have been out there, his name never known, his footsteps lost in the wilderness. For the investigators, the case became one of the darkest mysteries in county history. For Emily, it was a cruel transformation of memory. Her family's joyful fishing trip had not ended in a tragic accident. It had ended in horror. The photographs, once a way to preserve love, had instead become a record of their final terror. And for the community, the horrifying truth lingered like a shadow. That even in the most familiar places, in the light of an ordinary day, evil could step quietly out of the trees and change everything forever. Even though police and experts poured every effort into the investigation, the full truth of Mark and Lily's deaths would remain forever shrouded in darkness. The haunting photographs, the rusted fragments of their boat, and scattered whispers of a drifter lurking in the wilderness, all of it was nothing more than scattered pieces of a puzzle that never fit together. What remained, most vividly, was the chilling certainty that two innocent souls had been pulled into a nightmare deep in those endless waters and woods. Emily, who had spent years clinging to the fragile hope that her husband and daughter had simply suffered an accident, was now forced to confront a truth far more brutal. In her eyes, the photographs were no longer just evidence. They were pain frozen into images, a relentless reminder that her loved ones endured their final moments in terror. Some nights, she would jolt awake, convinced she could still hear the faint footsteps from the pictures echoing through her memory. The community surrounding the Everglades, too, would never look at the place the same way again. What was once seen as untamed and majestic now carried a shadow over it. People whispered that the mysterious man's presence still lingered somewhere among the mangroves, or perhaps it was the unsolved nature of the case itself that haunted the land. Whatever the truth, the story left behind a collective scar, a weight of unease that time could not erase. The story of Mark and Lily ultimately became more than just a disappearance. It became a reminder of how fragile safety truly is, how, even in the most peaceful of moments, danger may be quietly waiting just beyond sight. And it became a warning that forgetting an unsolved case sometimes means allowing the darkness to go on hiding what should be brought to light. For Emily, the memory of her husband and daughter is not only rooted in pain. She wants the world to remember them not as victims consumed by the Everglades, but as two people who lived fully, loved deeply, and whose bond remained visible even in those final photographs. Though their last moments were overshadowed by horror, their love endures a love that even evil could not erase. And for us, hearing this story years later, the message resonates clearly: to cherish every day, every moment with the ones we love, because no one knows when the darkness may arrive. The horrific truth of Mark and Lily's fate has become an everlasting haunting, but also their final message to the world: to hold on, to love fiercely, before everything is reduced to nothing more than a blurred photograph in memory.